Welcome back to Half Past Horror. I am the Lantern Keeper. Within this lantern dwell the souls of those whose stories were never meant to be told. Tonight, I shall share one with you. But be warned, some stories refuse to stay buried.
My name was Sam Mercer. I suppose I should start by telling you that I'm dead. I know that's probably not the kind of introduction you were expecting, but I've had a long time to think about what happened to me. And if I'm being honest, death wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing how much time I'd wasted while I was still alive. Especially with my brother. His name was Brad. Brad and I were only 18 months apart, but you would have thought we were raised in completely different families. I was the responsible one. Brad was the reckless one. I stayed in school. Brad dropped out. I bought a house. Brad moved from place to place. I got married. Brad never seemed to settle down. But when we were kids, none of that mattered. We were inseparable. We used to sneak out of the house after our parents went to sleep and sit on the roof of our garage, eating cereal straight from the box. Brad always said we'd still be doing it when we were 80. I believed him. Then our father died, and everything changed. Dad left us an old property outside town. It wasn't worth much. A rundown house, a barn, and several acres of land. I wanted to sell it. Brad wanted to keep it. He said Dad had promised him the property. I told him Dad had never said that. Brad called me a liar. I called him irresponsible. And then he said something that neither of us ever took back. He told me I had always thought I was better than him. I told him maybe I was. That was the last real conversation we ever had. 4 years passed. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic reason we stayed apart. There wasn't. That's what makes it worse. Neither of us called. Neither of us apologized. We simply kept waiting for the other person to make the first move. Then one Thursday night, my phone rang. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating dinner. I looked at the screen, Brad. I hadn't seen his name in years. For a moment, I just stared at it. I remember thinking that maybe something had happened. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he needed money. Maybe he was finally ready to talk. Then I became angry. I told myself I wasn't going to let him walk back into my life whenever he felt like it. So I didn't answer. The calls stopped. A few seconds later, my phone rang again. Brad. I let it ring. Then came a text, call me. It's important. I picked up the phone. I actually started typing a response. Then I deleted it. I told myself I'd call him tomorrow. That was the last decision I made while Brad was alive. The next morning, the police knocked on my door. They told me Brad had died in a car accident. They believed it happened sometime around midnight. His truck had left the road on a stretch of highway outside town. There had been rain. The road was slick. They said it looked like he lost control. I remember the officer asking if Brad had any enemies. I almost laughed. Brad had plenty of people who didn't like him. But enemies? I didn't know. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. The funeral was 3 days later. I stood in the back. I couldn't bring myself to walk toward the casket. I kept thinking about that phone call. That stupid phone call. The one I could have answered. The one I convinced myself could wait until morning. After the funeral, I went home. I didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I looked at my phone. Brad's last text was still there. Call me. It's important. I deleted it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought getting rid of the message would make the guilt disappear. It didn't. 6 months passed. I started rebuilding my life. Or at least pretending I had. Then one Tuesday night, my phone rang. I was watching television when I heard it. I looked down. My stomach dropped. Brad. His name was on my screen. I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't answer. The call stopped. Then it rang again. I stared at it. My hands were shaking. I answered, hello. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard breathing, slow, uneven. Brad. A voice came through the speaker. Sam. I couldn't breathe. It was him. There was no mistaking it. The same voice. The same way he said my name. I stood up so quickly that my chair fell backward. Where are you? Silence. Then Brad said, you need to find out who was in the truck with me. The call ended. I stood there for almost a minute. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I was terrified. I convinced myself someone had hacked his phone. But then I looked at the call log. The number was Brad's old number. The same number that had been disconnected after his death. I called it back. It didn't work. The next morning, I called the police. I told them what happened. They didn't believe me. I didn't blame them. Then I asked about the accident. The detective pulled up the report. Brad had been alone. There was no passenger. No witnesses. No evidence of another vehicle. I asked if they had checked his phone. The detective said it had been recovered from the wreckage. Most of it was destroyed. But they had managed to recover some call records. I asked him who Brad had called before the accident. He looked at the screen. Then looked at me. There were 3 calls to your number. I already knew that. Then he said there was one more. He gave me the number. I recognized it. Richard Voss. Dad's old business partner. I hadn't heard that name in years. Richard had been involved in the family business. After Dad died, he bought the property my father had left us. The same property Brad had wanted. I suddenly remembered something. Brad had called me about Richard once. He told me he didn't trust him. I told him he was being paranoid. The detective asked me why I knew Richard. I told him everything. The detective became quiet. Then he said, there's something you should know. He pulled out another file. A few days before the accident, Brad had contacted the police. He told them he believed someone had been following him. But he'd refused to give them a name. He had also asked about reopening an old financial investigation involving my father. I stared at the report. Brad had been trying to uncover something, and I had ignored him. That afternoon, I went to the old family property. Richard had purchased it after Brad refused to sell. The house had been empty for years. I still had a key. When I walked inside, everything came rushing back. The smell, the floors, the old staircase where Brad and I used to race each other. I went into Dad's study. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew Brad had been there. I started opening drawers, nothing. Then I noticed something behind the old bookshelf. A loose piece of wood. I pulled it away. There was a small metal box hidden inside the wall. Inside were bank statements. property records, copies of checks, and dozens of handwritten notes, all connected to Richard Voss. I spent hours going through them. Then I found something that made my hands go cold. A letter from Dad. It explained that Richard had been stealing money from the company for years. Dad had discovered it. He planned to report him. But Dad died before he could. Brad must have found the documents. And Richard must have known. I was still reading when I heard something downstairs. A door closing, I froze. Hello. No answer. I grabbed my phone. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was walking slowly across the living room. I ran downstairs. Nobody was there. The front door was open. I called the police. They searched the property but found nothing. That night I received another call. Brad. I answered immediately. His voice sounded different this time, tired. Almost peaceful. Sam. I'm here. I'm sorry. For what? For leaving you with this. I started crying. Brad, I should have answered. He was silent. Then he said, I know. I couldn't speak. He continued. Don't trust the accident report. What do you mean? They didn't find everything. What didn't they find? There was a long silence. Then Brad whispered, look at the driver's side. The call ended. The next morning, I went back to the detective. I told him what Brad had said. He pulled the accident photographs. We looked through them together. There were tire marks along the driver's side of Brad's truck. Marks that didn't belong to Brad's vehicle. The original investigators had assumed they came from another car passing on the highway. But when they compared the measurements, they realized the other vehicle had been extremely close. Someone had forced Brad off the road. The investigation was reopened. 3 weeks later, they arrested Richard Voss. They found evidence linking him to Brad's death. He had followed Brad that night. Brad had threatened to expose him. Richard had tried to force him off the road. He succeeded. But he didn't know Brad had already made copies of the documents. And he certainly didn't know Brad had tried one last time to call me. The detective later told me something strange. Brad's phone had been destroyed in the crash. It couldn't make calls. But the phone records showed something impossible. 6 months after Brad died, his phone had called mine. 3 times. Nobody could explain it. I can. Because I know what I heard. And I know my brother. Sometimes I still hear from him. Not every night. Not even every month. But every once in a while, my phone rings. No number appears. I answer. There's usually silence. Then I hear him, Sam. And every time, I say the same thing. I'm sorry. He never tells me it's okay. Maybe it isn't. Maybe some things don't need forgiveness. Maybe they just need to be understood. The last time he called, I asked him something. I asked him if he was still angry with me. There was a long silence. Then he said, no. I started crying. Then why do you keep calling? His voice became very quiet. Because you finally answer. That was the last time I heard my brother. And now, I understand something I didn't understand when I was alive. We always think we have more time, tomorrow. Next week. Next year. We'll make the call. We'll apologize. We'll visit. We'll say the things we should have said. But sometimes tomorrow never comes. My name is Sam Mercer. I was given permission to tell you this story. The Lantern Keeper says every soul has a reason for remaining inside his lantern. I used to think mine was guilt. Now I think I know the truth. I wasn't trapped because I couldn't let go of my brother. I was trapped because I never told him. I was sorry. So if someone you love calls you tonight, answer. Even if you're angry. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if you think you have plenty of time. Because one day, the phone may ring, and you may give anything in the world for it to be your brother on the other end. And if you're lucky, you'll get the chance to answer while they are still alive.